Yeah, so tonight, hopefully, did everyone get a chance to see the email I sent out? I know not everybody checks their CCSU email, so um, I threw the remind into the mix too. Problem is, in remind, you can only send a message up to whatever 180 characters or something. So I had to kind of double up and say, go look at your email because there's more information there. But I spent some time over the last week since we are basically halfway through the class. This is class number 8 of 15. So that basically means we're halfway through tonight's class. We will be halfway there. So I thought it was a good time, and I had you guys post your Moodle links and put a forum onto your Moodles, and I did get through. I don't know if you get notifications about that, but I did go through and provide sort of some initial feedback on your Moodle projects. So you should have gotten that. If you didn't get a message about it, if you go into your Moodle, you should see in whatever forum you have at the top of your page, you should see a comment from me. And at the same time, I was just kind of going back over things and looking at where we are on our TIPs, where we are with the Moodles, where we are with our forums, and sort of the classwork that we've been doing with video and audio and graphics and all of that. And it just sort of occurred to me that we've been cranking away at this stuff, and I've kind of been throwing things at you during a class and then saying, okay, over the next week on your own, go work on this. And that it might be useful for some of you, and maybe not everybody this will apply to, just to have some time here, like lab time, so that if there is something you're working on, if you want to get some things done on your Moodle, or you want me to be there to answer some questions as you're working on something. So I thought what we do tonight is use at least part of tonight just as sort of an open lab. And what I'll say is stay, as long as you feel that it is useful for you. I'm not going to necessarily force everyone to stay all the way till 9:30. If you feel like you're in pretty good shape and things are good and you've gotten your questions answered, then, by all means, you don't have to stick around. But I do also know from looking through things that there is collectively a fair amount of work that we have already covered that has not quite been finished yet, or we're not sort of completely up to date on. So if you are one of those people and want to take the time tonight to have just kind of a quiet spot to work on stuff and ask me questions or things like that, so that'll be sort of the second part of tonight's class. I'll leave it open to you in terms of how late you would like to stay. I will stay all the way till 9:30 if people would like me to. I have no problems with that. Tomorrow is Friday and it's a pep rally day, so we don't even have a full day of school tomorrow. So I'm okay staying to the end. But before that, there are some pieces that I wanted to go over. Since I couldn't meet with you guys last week, and I apologize for that. I don't know if it was something I ate or something, but the night of our class, or the afternoon of the night of our class last week, I was definitely not feeling well. And we had an in-service the next day, and I wasn't even sure I was going to make it in for that. But he knows I made it to the in-service because we were actually stuck. We were stuck in a group together on a discussion thing. But it was, I don't know what it was. It was one of those things. But in any case, I just wanted to kind of follow up on that activity from last week, see if people have questions or concerns, and just talk a little bit about the role of audio in education, in instructional materials, and some takeaways and so on. I wanted to take a moment to just kind of, we've kind of finished the materials design parts of the class at this point. We've got sort of text and graphics we've covered video and animation, and we've covered audio. And sort of among those 4 or 5 elements, that's kind of all of the types of materials, aside from activity structures and all, that you're going to be putting into your Moodle. So I want to just take a moment to kind of put a button on that whole thing and look at all of those as an overview, just to wrap that up. Then I want to talk a little bit about the next step of your TIPs. Most of you have gotten the phase 1 and phase 2 of your TIPs in, so I want to keep us moving forward on that project. So we're going to talk about phase 3 tonight, which is about actually going out and figuring out what specific technology you're going to be proposing to use to solve the problem that you've identified. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk pretty briefly about Web 2.0, and that's really more about just sort of opening the door to the next couple of weeks, where we're going to be looking at what Web 2.0 is and what that means, and what are some resources that you might be able to include in your Moodles or just in your daily class lives or whatever. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, like I said, the last thing is really kind of looking at where you are and deciding if you would like to get some work done tonight here, or just kind of making sure that you've got a plan moving forward. All right, so that is our overview. So to start with, let's talk the audio bit of things. Actually, I guess I'll have to go back to this to last week. So before we talk about maybe the specifics of the project that I left you last week, from the reading, maybe you may not remember the reading now that it's been a week or so, but in terms of sort of the strengths of audio or reasons why you might select audio as an instructional tool, do you remember much about what the chapter or the article I gave you said, or even just in your own experiences with working through the project or so on? What would lead us to use audio? What is audio good at? What are reasons that we might pick that as a instructional tool? Go for it. Get us started.
Students listening, I guess it's easier for them to comprehend listening to something versus just reading it. Remember, they were saying something about like if you have text, it's okay to put an audio with it, as you can follow along and listen to it. And I guess it's less distracting. Maybe if there's like a video in the background, they're like, how do you say, like sensory overload, where there's too much comprehending. Just text and audio is like.
Yeah, and in fact, I think they point out that research has found that that's actually the most effective combination, is to have audio with text. And they specifically said text, not other like graphics and things like that, although they did talk about using audio to kind of walk through a diagram or something like that. But yeah, so using audio as a support, I mean, hopefully you guys have come across at some point in a professional learning experience or just in your own research and so on, the whole idea of multiple intelligences. Does that ring a bell? Kind of, yes. So, one of the intelligences is oral intelligence, and those students are going to process new information the best if it is presented to them as an oral presentation. And then there are people who are visual learners, and they will process new material the best if they see it visually. So if you can present the material in multiple modes, and because we know text and audio together is very effective, then that just kind of doubles the impact of what you're trying to do. So rather, maybe what you would want to do is say in a Moodle, have a page where maybe you have text of instructions that they can read, but then you might also embed on that page an audio file where they can click on it and they can listen to the instructions. And even if you're just literally reading what's on the page, it just maybe connects to a different group of students that may be just looking at text, or they're not interested in reading the text. So definitely that's a big one. What else might have come out of that audio? Maybe sort of looking at it in conjunction or in comparison to some of the other modes of stuff we've looked at.
I know that at my school we have a very large population of English language learners, and I know that especially in like their EL classes, those teachers use audio a lot, whether it's like putting text in and then translating it to their native language and then either to English or something like that. But I know even in a meeting we had today, they talk about how they use that all the time as so that they can hear it.
Yeah, I mean, when we learn language, what do we learn first? The sound. We learn to speak it first, right? And then we learn the written form of it. So yeah, certainly in situations, if you're dealing with people who are working in a language that is not their first language, and that could be English as a second language, or it could just be a world language class or any situation like that, presenting the material in audio will oftentimes connect with the students much faster than it would if they were to see things. And again, particularly if it's in conjunction with seeing it at the same time. But interestingly enough, I've been sort of in this realm, but from the music perspective, that there is a whole theory of music instruction called music as a second language that basically teaches music in the same way that we acquire language. And it's sound before sight. It's always dealing with what you hear and what you're creating as opposed to the written form of it first. So, yeah, what else? There's one other sort of very practical thing that they pointed out relating to audio, especially maybe this is giving too much away, but like audio versus video.
It's like easier to stream, less bandwidth.
Yeah, much, much smaller files. And especially if they're compressed audio files. Uncompressed audio, roughly, rule of thumb, is 10 megabytes per stereo minute. So if you have a 5-minute song that is uncompressed audio, that's about 50 megabytes. If you compress it to an MP3 or an AAC or a WAV file, it's generally 1 megabyte per stereo minute. So it's a compression factor of almost 10. So a 5-minute song will be a 5 megabyte file. And so if you're dealing with situations where you're maybe in a school that has limited bandwidth, or just the devices you're on maybe don't have the fastest network access or things like that, audio from a very practical standpoint is going to be a much smaller, much easier form to kind of push. That's why, if I don't know how many people have cut the cord or who tend to watch, your TV through internet. But when your video or when your internet connection starts to slow down, what goes first? The video, right? The video starts to pixelate, it starts to lag. You notice that background stuff maybe gets a little fuzzy and it's not, but the audio usually always stays pristine. And it's the same thing, if you go to YouTube or something like that, the first thing that they will reduce and get rid of is the video. The audio, there's almost no situation where you're not going to be able to stream audio in real time and have it sound as good as it needs to sound. So that could be another consideration as well. Yeah, so just, again, in the realm of this, we have text, we have graphics, we have video, we have animation, we have audio, and sort of asking yourself in the Moodle or just in your classrooms, well, when would I use these 5? What are they good for? Sort of understanding what the biggest benefits are of each one of them can be useful, because then you can go, well, the best tool for this job is the hammer as opposed to the saw, or it's creating an audio as opposed to going the whole thing and creating a video. Plus, just making videos takes a lot more effort, I think, than creating audio files. Like, you can create pretty good sounding audio stuff just on your phone, whereas video, you tend to get into, you need a camera, you need a setup, you've got to think about what's around you and all of that. So, all right, so maybe then to connect, and I know not everybody got the Audacity projects posted, and I know a couple of people contacted me that they had certain technical issues, and that's understandable. But maybe particularly from those of you that did get the project completed, like, what were your takeaways? What was sort of the point of that exercise that I put you through? What did you learn from it? Go for it.
I learned that it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, because I saw that, and I'm not going to lie, I was like, oh my God, like, I'm not going to know how to do this. Like, it looked very overwhelming when I first opened it. And then I watched the video that you had put up, and then I it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, and that, Audacity, the reason we throw Audacity out there is because it's free, and because it's free, and it's PC and Mac, and it's free, right? So you don't need, if you've got Macs, you probably have GarageBand on there already, and you can certainly use a program like that. PCs, I don't know what I have a Windows 10 machine at school, and I haven't looked around it enough to know if they include, I know there used to be Windows Movie Maker, but I don't think that really exists anymore. So I don't know if there's an equivalent in the PC world where, just generally speaking, like Windows 10 machines have some sort of a voice recorder or something built in. but knowing that Audacity is there, and Audacity for what it is pretty good. The one place it falls down comparison to more traditional digital audio workstations is that all of its editing is destructive. And I can't remember if I went through that specifically in the exercise you did, but in a typical audio program, you've got your audio, and say you want to change the EQ of it. You would add an effect to the track, but it doesn't actually go in and change the original recording. When you hit play, the computer is actually recalculating the existing waveform and applying that EQ to it in real time. So what it means is that you never have to worry that your original recording is being changed or modified or messed up. All of the effects and everything are happening in real time when you hit play. Audacity, because of its nature, all of the effects you add and all that kind of stuff actually redraw and recreate the waveform. So when you added an EQ and applied it, it actually redrew the waveform. When you went in and did the noise reduction, it actually redraws the waveform. And that's fine if you make a mistake or you don't like the results, you can undo it right away. But if you come back a couple days later to something you've done in Audacity and you want to go back and recover the original wave file, it's not going to be there anymore. So that's the one drawback really of Audacity, is that destructive editing as opposed to non-destructive editing. But for what it does what it does pretty well. And did I mention it's free? So that's always a good tool. But yeah, there's a lot on the screen initially. If you're not used to looking at that sort of an environment, there's a lot of symbols and this and that and everything else. But the actual thing of making a recording is pretty straightforward. And once you kind of do it once or twice, it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense now. And there's obviously a lot of features of the program that I didn't have you get into. My main focus with the exercise was to, what I like to say is just the biggest thing with audio is just to do the most with whatever it is you have, right? If you have access to a professional recording studio with $5,000 microphones and an isolated sound booth, then good on you, mate. Use it, because you're going to get awesome results from that. But it is also very possible to get completely passable results, if not really good results, simply by using whatever you happen to have available, as long as you use it effectively. So I was going to put something in like extra credit but for those of you that did it, who thinks they ended up with like the most bizarre, the most creative solution for where you did your recording? Did anybody go? I think somebody, actually it might, I can't remember who, somebody said they ended up in their coat closet.
Oh,
Was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually not uncommon. I've in the past I've had a lot of people who have ended up in closets doing these things. What was effective about the closet?
Well, so right now we're moving this weekend. We bought a house, but right now we're in an apartment on Route 4. So in Farmington, and so it's relatively noisy. I mean, not like terribly with the windows closed, but you can notice the cars.
Yeah.
And our neighbors aren't the most quiet most of the time either, so and the walls aren't the thickest. So yeah, the closet's just an additional.
So you're saying it's time to move, is it?
Yeah, exactly. That's really what I'm saying. But yeah, it's just an additional layer with more walls, and it's kind of in this particular of the two rooms, it's like around the corner a little bit, so there's more obstruction, and on the other side of the apartment building from Route 4. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just very isolated.
Yeah, I mean, the location is usually, I mean, even in a professional recording studio, that's essentially what they're dealing with. That's the biggest issue. And it's location in terms of the physical space. So that's why studios spend hundreds of thousands of dollars creating rooms that are very specifically tuned in particular acoustic ways. Studios will have their live room, and they'll have their dead room, and they'll have their wood room, and they'll have their stone room, all to get kind of different environments. So it's that, but then it's also the location of the recording device to the sound source. And particularly if you're working with a laptop, if you're working with your phone, if you're working with something like that, the closer you can get and the more isolated your space can be, the better your results are going to be. It basically just eliminates any excess noise, any excess sounds that are going to get into your mix. It's going to allow it to focus on your voice the most clearly. A lot of microphones work the best when they're in a pretty close range. So don't be afraid to, and this is why usually people end up doing this on their own and shutting themselves in a closet because, sometimes it does look a little weird. You're like sitting there with your laptop 3 inches away from your face and you're like talking to it and people look at you weird. Actually, one year somebody had like built a tent for themselves out of like winter coats and things. They like tented themselves underneath a bunch of winter coats and was doing the recording. And they did say that I think their spouse at the time was like, "What are you doing?" So, yeah. So that if I were to give one piece of advice, that's probably the best one is just to set the environment up that you're recording in to be as controlled as possible. Then beyond that, I walked you through EQ. And, EQ has an interesting history, especially in relationship to telephones, because when they invented telephone, they realized that the wires and the technology they were using just didn't have the ability to transmit the full bandwidth of the human voice. So they experimented and they discovered that really to understand the human voice, you only need a very narrow band of frequencies. Humans can hear from about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And where we get meaning out of human speech is a band from about 2,000 to 5,000 hertz or so. And so as long as you can hear those frequencies, you can actually get rid of the rest and still understand. That's why, telephone voices tend to have that very sort of attenuated sound, maybe not so much anymore that it's all digital, but that's all because they realized we don't need the low frequencies. We don't need the high frequencies. If we target this narrow band in the middle, you will still be understood. And so, applying that to audio recording, if you want to make something easier to understand for your listeners, if you can boost that little range of frequencies, even by a little bit, that increases your listeners' ability to understand. It's this weird connection between physiology and physics and perception and all that, but it's an interesting trick. And then reducing noise. I showed you the noise filter thing, which can help if you're in an environment where you can't control everything and you've got a fan going or an AC unit going or a car going by or something, that those tools can also help to get rid of things that aren't the actual voice. So yeah, basically, like I said, it's doing the most with whatever you've got to work with. And it's the area that's probably the closest to me because I am an audio engineer and that's mainly what I teach, being a music teacher. So I'm constantly dealing with people saying, well, I can't get a good recording because all I've got is my phone. But what I've learned is that you can actually make really, really good quality sounding recordings if that's all you got, So, yeah, so that was sort of the main point of all of that. Anything else about that experience? And again, I know a couple of you still haven't gone through it, and I would still ask, please, to do it because it's a good thing to go through and to see how all of that works. But any other comments or questions or concerns that came up with your audacious experiment, Audacity? Sneakily, I also incorporated one other Moodle activity into last week's thing, which was a Moodle lesson. So if some of you have been wondering, like, what's the difference between like a lesson and a wiki or a lesson and a page, what you went through to do the Audacity thing, that was a Moodle lesson. And basically, it is kind of like a wiki, except the students aren't going to create any content. They don't have any way to change the pages. But it's a way for you to create a whole structure of content pages that then the students can navigate through in whatever ways you want them to. So when I created that activity, I would sort of come up with the instruction page, and then to demonstrate good practices in terms of delivering it in multiple modes, I would also create the video that covered the same material that was in the written page and spoke. So I had audio at the same time that you were seeing the visuals of the program. But then I gave you, the user, the student, the option, do you want to watch the video? And you could click over and watch the video. If you didn't want to and you think you got everything just from reading the text, then you just read the text. Then when you were ready to move on, you moved on to the next section. So that's one of the nice things. It definitely takes some more work. You want to plan it out ahead of time because you have to build in all the navigation buttons. You have to think about each page that you want your students to be able to get to from each page. So you definitely want to plan something like that out. But it's a good way to kind of draw a whole bunch of material together in a controlled way where then you can just let your students go through the material at their own pace. So I wanted to kind of throw that into the mix too as sort of another Moodle activity or a Moodle thing that we can check off. All right. So what else? Anything else related to audio? So what I did here, and right now the page is hidden, I'll unhide it, but is I just kind of pulled together all of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of instructional media. And that's really what the last, say, 6 weeks have been about, is we've looked at visual medias, which are text or graphics, or text and graphics. And, text obviously is very simple. It's self-paced. People can go back and reread as much as they want to. It's the easiest, certainly, to create and manipulate. Everybody knows how to use a word processor, or like in our Moodles, just putting text onto a page. But then also visually, we've got graphics. And we went through those projects with the Gestalt principles, understanding that when you get into the world of graphics, the main thing of Gestalt is that you tend to see the whole graphic as a whole. So you want to make sure you're not just thinking about all the stuff you're putting in there, but how is it arranged? How does it interact with each other? Is it organized well? Is it grouped well? Is it going to be confusing? So that's just, to keep in mind. And in some ways, Gestalt applies to text as well. Then we had the aural mode, which was audio. That gives us, I think they mentioned in the article, a closeness that connects students to material in a very personal way when you hear a voice speaking something. The effective support for visuals, which we just talked about, the smaller files, easier to produce, we talked about that. And then kind of what I just went through, just maximize whatever you have. Pay attention to your location. You can use EQ as a tool. You can use noise reduction as a tool. Just do whatever you can to make the audio king in whatever it is you're producing. Make sure that it is super easy to understand. And then of course we have video, which is the combining of those two things. You get the user control. It's very personalized because when we see people, it's even more than when we hear them talking. If you see somebody talking, that becomes extremely personalized. It does combine all of these other modes. So it's a good way if you really want to hit on all cylinders all at once. A video can give you text, can give you graphics, can give you audio all at the same time. Just make sure that, if you remember from our work that week, don't overdo the cognitive load on your viewer. So don't go too overboard just because you do have all of that stuff. But it does produce, video. It's larger files. You obviously have to do a little bit more in terms of producing video than you would have to do on any of the others. So as long as you're planning your videos, reducing that cognitive load, and making sure to engage your user so that it's not a boring video. So this is just a way to kind of in one quick fell swoop kind of look at everything that we've looked at. And so especially as you're building your Moodle projects, as you're trying to figure out, well, what's the best thing for me to use in order to present this material, we now kind of have this whole library of options to draw from that you can start to build in. All right, so that's where we've been, believe it or not. We've covered a lot in 7 weeks, 7.5 weeks. All right, so where do I want to go next? Oh, let's talk TIP next. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, one of the new things for this coming week, and I'm trying to be wary of piling on too much new stuff each week, but I do want to keep the TIPs going forward. Is so what we've done so far with the TIPs is you had a chance to analyze existing TIPs, give you an idea of what they look like, what kind of materials in them, what kinds of things go. And then phase 2 was to do your needs assessment. So at this point, you should know the problem that you're trying to solve and have actually analyzed and figured out, where are your target audience right now? Where do you want them to get to? And so on. So we've completed those 2 phases. So phase 3, now we start to get into the nitty gritty. Now we need to find the actual solution to our problems. And this being a technology class and us being focused for this thing on technology integration, it is no big surprise that it is going to be some form of technology or other that is what you are proposing to use to address, or that is going to be a part of the problem you're trying to address. So I'm not going to read down through all of this. You can do that on your own time over the next week. But basically the bottom line is this week is where you're going to start going out and trying to find either the hardware or the software or the combination of the two that you are going to need to incorporate or to need to have in order for you to address your problem. This is the technology you are looking to integrate. That is what this is about. So, so that's what you're going to be doing. So, as I say, the good news is that a lot of these problems you're probably identifying have probably been around long enough that there are multiple people out there who have looked for solutions. So you're not going to have to be inventing some new piece of software or some new approach. There's probably stuff out there already that you can use. As maybe an obvious example, a district realizes they want to be able to centralize their grading practices, and they've been just letting teachers use their own individual grade books. District goes out and they go, oh, look, there's this thing called Power School. Does anybody use anything other than Power School? I think at this point they seem to have sort of cornered the market. I know for a while there were a few people out there doing things like Power School, but now it seems like Power School. But that's, there's the solution. That's the piece of technology we want to integrate is, this thing called Power School. So you're not having to invent the technology. It should be out there somewhere. So you're going to be just going out there and looking for it. Just a couple of things to be, make sure you stay focused on your target, on your goal, on your problem. As I say, it's easy to get distracted by flashy bells and whistles. And if you're just trying to solve Y, don't find something that solves X, Y, and Z. Like, try to keep it as focused as possible on your problem. As you all know, the more complicated a piece of software or piece of hardware gets, the more likely it is that teachers are going to struggle with incorporating it and so on. So if you are a third grade English as a second language teacher, and you're trying to increase vocabulary, then look for a tool that specifically targets elementary age English as a second language vocabulary. You're not necessarily looking for an entire literacy program. You're looking to try to identify something simple. So just keep that in mind. So there's some tips. Keep your goal at hand. I suggest just write out a quick version of your goal so you can just keep referring to it. Try to find several potential solutions so that you can compare them to each other. Most likely you will be able to find multiple possible solutions. And then that gives you some room to kind of evaluate them and figure out which one's best. So if possible, identify. Feel free to contact the software. I know you probably aren't going to maybe actually put this into practice. Maybe you will, but probably not. But even so, even if this is just a pretend exercise, if you have questions about a piece of software or a piece of hardware, write to the company. Not only will you hopefully get information that will answer your questions, but as I say, it's also a good way to find out how responsive a company is. There's lots of apps out there now that look really cool, but if you need support from the app developer, you write to them and you never hear anything back. So that might be something to take into consideration. If you're looking at a couple of different possible solutions, maybe the fact that one company seems to be really on the ball with their customer service maybe will help, sway your decisions. And again, you're not expected to be the technology expert. In a school setting, you would have an IT department, hopefully, or IT personnel that can help you with the technical side. But you need to at least be able to evaluate the software, the hardware, and know enough about it to know if it's the right solution, right? It's usually the school leadership that makes the decision to incorporate a piece of software into their school, even if those aren't the people who are the IT specialists. They rely on their IT specialists to then help implement and to answer questions in the specifics. So again, this is not about you becoming an IT person. So just like we've done with the other phases, and I'm just trying to keep this sort of similarly structured on each phase. So this is going to be another Word document, so you're just going to type this all up in Word. Just quickly restate your goal. That doesn't even need to be a full paragraph. Just whatever you're targeting right at the top. Then a couple of paragraphs or so describing your target in general terms. And this is just whether you think it's going to be a software solution, a hardware solution, some sort of a blended solution. Is it the solution that is it using technology that maybe you already have in hand and the issue is more professional development? In which case you would want to talk about that. You still want to talk about the software or hardware that you're incorporating, but maybe it's more about the training or getting people to use it. And then a couple of paragraphs for each possible solution. So if you find 3 different pieces of software that look like they'll work, give me a little write-up and evaluation on each of them. And then finally, having looked at your possibilities, make a decision about what you would propose as being the solution you want to move forward with. And then just defend that choice. I picked software B because it was geared most closely to my students' age group. And when I contacted the companies, they seemed to have the best customer support, and the program just looks cool, or whatever you're going to use for your criteria to decide between them. So you just you write all that up, and just like you've done on the other ones, just submit it right to this assignment, and that will be that. Questions about the overview of that? You guys never have any questions. By the way, and this comes out of a question that somebody had from their phase 2 work. Actually, I think that question was more along the lines of, I think it was you that were asking, because you kind of shifted in what your goal was, should you go back and sort of update your previous work? And the answer to something like that is yes. Where we're going with this, and I think I might have gone over this first week, but it's been a while, is we're doing each of these individual phases as kind of separate documents. But in the end, what you're going to do for the final version is go back to those individual documents and literally kind of cut and paste big chunks of them out and put them into your actual plan that you would submit to a school board or to an administration or whatever. We're not going to need everything that we've written. Like, for example, in the final one, you probably don't need to talk about all of the other solutions you looked at, because by that point you should have picked a solution and you're really championing that one solution. But by the time we get to the final assembly, it should largely be copy and paste portions from each of the phases and then just kind of clean it all up as one document. So that's why I'm structuring it in this way, why I'm having you do it in Word, so that you have all of those individual documents, and then we'll have the ability in the end to really quickly kind of pull it all together into one. So that's just a bit of a glance down the road. We have a couple more phases. One phase is going to be about the actual professional development, the actual personnel, what do you need in order to actually deploy this technology? And then there'll be a final one that's sort of odds and ends about, needs and a calendar and budget and things like that. So we have a couple more pieces of the TIPs that we still have to go after this, but that's the idea, is we'll have these individual documents that then we will just glom together into one big TIP. All right, so yeah, so you can certainly, like I said, read over. I know there's, on these pages, there tends to be a lot because I try to sort of explain everything. So just on your own, just read through it. But again, it basically boils down to probably a couple of pages where you are examining what specific technologies you're actually going to propose incorporating and going from there. Okay. All right, one more thing, and then we will kind of transition into lab work for the night. And that is Web 2.0. So what is Web 2.0? I should start with this. Have you guys heard the term Web 2.0?
I've heard of it, but I forgot what it is.
Okay. Anyone else even heard of it?
We got a class called that in my school. Kids hated it.
Oh yeah?
Well,
Do you know
not
what was?
because of the class? It's because the teacher was a monster. She was really
Oh.
mean, like incredibly mean. She once called a girl a whale, and kept her job. But we probably
Wow. Okay. I had a conductor in college. I respected him immensely as a musician, but he was a real jerk. And this was at the Eastman School of Music, which, if you don't know the Eastman School, it's consistently one of the top 2 or 3 music schools in the country, if not in the world. So the students who are there are super, and in the middle of an orchestra rehearsal, and this was the top orchestra of the school, I remember him stopping and just telling a student, "I don't even know how you got into this school." Like, ouch. Like, really? But anyways, so it wasn't, but do you know what the class was about? Or just that the teacher was mean?
I never asked. I
Yeah.
kind of stuck in my corner most.
Because she
of the
was
time.
mean and you didn't want to
Yeah.
talk.
Lunch wasn't.
All right. So yeah, so Web 2.0, it's an interesting term because actually those of us in the field of educational technology are actually kind of pushing against the use of the term now, because we feel like it's kind of played out and it kind of doesn't mean as much as it used to. But it still is out there and people still use it to kind of refer to a particular use of the internet. And I guess to sort of understand it, the beginning of the internet, does anyone know what HTML stands for? We always see, like, every website, right, is .htm or HTML. You actually know what that stands for? Yeah, that's the first part of it. That's the HT. Yeah, hypertext markup language, right? So the web, when it started, it was obviously just text being thrown around. And they realized that text was pretty boring, so they wanted to come up with some way that they could, in addition to transmitting the text, could also transmit formatting for the text. So they created these this markup language, these tags, and if you enclose text in the tags, it would then change the way that the browser would display that text. So for a very simple example, like bolding a text. So if you put the /B end caret and then text and then /B/ and then caret, then when the web browser analyzed that text, it would realize, oh, these are instructions for me to change the way this text looks. So hypertext markup language. So it's just a way of marking up this text that was being sent over the internet so that you could format it on a page, so that you could make it look like something other than just regular text. So sort of generation 1, Web 1.0, was all pretty much about transmitting text from a server to you, to your browsers, where then you just looked at that text on the screen. And at most, there were hyperlinks that allowed you then to click on something and go to a different page and look at different text that was formatted on the screen. But it was not terribly interactive. It was basically a one-way street. The only thing you could do was just sort of choose which pages you wanted to go look at. So the idea of Web 2.0 is that term came about when the web started gaining interactivity. when web pages started being able to be designed where users could interact with the content on the page and do things to it. So that's why they started calling Web 2.0. It's kind of the second generation of the web. Web 1.0 was very one way. Web 2.0 became a two-way street. So users could start interacting with the websites and doing things and playing games and stuff like that. So today we don't usually call it Web 2.0. It's the interactive internet. So it's anything, today we would tend to call it web apps, or cloud-based, software. So when you're able to now go, even our Moodle, the Moodle software, the Moodle cloud is Web 2.0, because you actually can generate content, can format that content, can make that content available to others. They can interact with that content through activities that have been structured. All of that is still coming through the internet. It's still coming through HTML, but it's a much more advanced HTML language. So we basically figured out how to make the web a lot more interactive. And that's really what Web 2.0 is. So far, we've covered all of our media stuff. And part of what you should be doing and should have been doing and should be doing into the future in your Moodles is starting to get all of that content in there. So whether it's videos or graphics or text pages or activities or anything like that. What we're going to look at starting next week, and again, this is just to kind of get a head start on next week, is to start looking out there in the world of Web 2.0, of interactive internet, and starting to look for possibilities that either you just want to look at incorporating into your classroom, or that you might want to incorporate into your Moodle. All right. How many of you have used, what's it called? Kahoot, right? You haven't used Kahoot. It's a really quick way to throw a kind of a game show style quiz up on
Oh, I have.
where it's the different shapes and they like the thing and the music and then, right? So that is a Web 2.0 app. And if you, on your Moodle, if you wanted to incorporate a Kahoot, then you could create a Kahoot on Kahoot and it generates a link to it. And then you could put that link on your Moodle, and you're now extending the functionality of your Moodle by incorporating these other things that you can bring in and add to what's going on. So for next week, it's really just a forum for next week. So I just want you to go out and start thinking. You've probably already been using Web 2.0 stuff in your classrooms and not even really realized that's what you were doing. I do give you a page here that's got a few websites that sort of aggregate a whole bunch of Web 2.0 applications. You can see most of these sites still are calling it Web 2.0. So tools for teachers, what you need to know about Web 2.0, that's got some things on it. The best Web 2.0 applications for education in 2018 so far. So all of these are just sites where on the site, they have a whole bunch of links to a whole bunch of interactive types of content on the web. And I'm certainly not expecting you to go out and research every single one of them, but based on whatever your content area is and whatever the subject is that you're dealing with for your Moodle, maybe go out there and see if you can find resources. In my music theory class, I've come across a great website that has some very simple practice tools for identifying intervals and identifying chords and things like that. So rather than me having to go and build something like that, I just put a link to that on my, in our case, Teams page, and my students can go there and they can click on that and then they can quiz themselves on all this stuff. So it's that kind of idea of looking for something that you might be able to incorporate. So I gave you, like I said, links to those sort of summary pages. The forum itself is just to go out there and start looking, find one, and for the forum post, just do a quick write-up about it. What is it? How does it work? Do you think it would be useful in your classroom? Give a link to it so that you can, if other people want to kind of see what you found, you can put that there. And then, as always with these forums, this is the third one of these. Should be a conversation. So somebody posts something, check it out. If you think it looks cool too, comment on that. Or I say, whether these tools would benefit the students or not. Maybe you look at some Web 2.0 tool and you're like, that just would not be helpful at all. It's too this, or it's too that, or it's too complicated, or whatever. So that's our forum discussion for the coming week. And that, like I said, our focus the next 2 weeks of class is going to be on Web 2.0. So we'll look more at it. I am going to have you guys, I don't know if we'll do it next week based off of what you find for this forum, but to have you guys do like little mini presentations about some Web 2.0 tool that you've found that's useful or fun or something like that. So we'll do some stuff like that where we can share out. All right. So in terms of our objectives for today, we wrapped up our audio stuff, talked about what audio can do. We've talked about the technology evaluation for the TIP plan. We've talked about Web 2.0. So really then my plan, and we're pretty much on schedule because we're about halfway through the class. We actually started a little early today, which was fine with me, is to simply, like I said, I'm gonna call it open lab. So I will stay as late as you need me to stay. I will not get upset if you decide that it's not useful for you to stay and you want to just go home. But if there's anything I can do to help you to look at something, if you've got questions, or if it's just useful to have an hour or so where you don't have distractions from family and friends and dogs and schoolwork and stuff like that. What I did is, to try to be as helpful as possible, is I did put this up on this week's and basically just tried to summarize in one place sort of all the things that we've done so far and give you links back to each of those things. So if you want to do sort of a personal evaluation of what you still owe in terms of work we've already done, or just to kind of double check. So we've done the 2 official forums so far, and I think most of you are in good shape on those, but if you still haven't contributed to those forums, it's not too late to do so. One was about a tech question, the other was about graphics and video. And then I also included in there the 3, these were more the production forums, where you were supposed to post a graphic, you were supposed to post a video, and you were supposed to post the 2 audios from this past week. So those are all kind of in-class forum types of things. We've done the 2 PLN posts, and I will be willing to tell you this right now. If I have to minimize or put the brakes on one piece of what we're covering in this class in order for us to more effectively get through the rest, this would be the piece that I'm going to kind of pay the least attention to. All right, I'm not saying it's dead yet, but if it looks like it's going to be more useful for us to be able to focus more of our energies on the Moodle projects and things like that. So at least to date, just make sure that you've at least done the first 2 postings, and I provide links back to where the instructions were. For the Moodle itself, and this is where, having gone through everybody's Moodles, I think the most work still is to be done for many of you. You should have both of your ID plans. Those were things that we posted and you should have gotten feedback on. So that was when you were doing the ADDIE instructional design work. And then I don't have specific links because it's not something that has a specific set of instructions. But along the way, each week I've been saying, be working on building out your content. So remember that each section of your Moodle, one of the few requirements is that each section should have a text version of an overview for that section. In this section, or in this lesson, we are going to learn about blah, 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 a couple sentences. And you should also be creating a video. And that was actually, I'd asked you back in the video assignment to kind of use that video assignment to make at least one of these. So at the beginning of each section should be that video and that text overview. And then beyond that, it's just whatever of the tools that we've covered you think are going to be the most useful for you to deliver that material, between the Moodle activities and the Moodle content and the graphics and the videos and the audios and the text and the animation and the. So really, at this point, considering that we're halfway through the course, there should, at least a couple of the sections of your Moodle should be getting pretty filled out with the actual instructional content. So there's that. And then the final thing is the TIP project. And like I said, I think most of you at this point have submitted both the phase 1 and phase 2 of the TIPs. But if you look back and you realize you have not yet submitted that, you should also get those 2 Word documents finished up and try to get those submitted, especially now that we've really got phase 3 on there as well. So that's just kind of a summary overview. If you want to click on each of those and just go back and just double check that you've done all that, or make a little checklist for yourself to see what you might be missing. But obviously, I think that the biggest piece of it is probably the Moodle project itself. There were a lot of you, I think almost everybody at least had titles for your sections, but there were a number of you for that was basically all that was there, was just titles of sections. So we really want to start getting some of that content in there. Because looking forward, I know we still have 7 meetings left, but the one before Thanksgiving, which is basically in a month, is going to be what I call beta testing week. So that's going to be a week where other people are going to go into your Moodle as a student and kind of try to go through it and then give you feedback about their experience and if there's any things they ran into that you might want to adjust. Because then after Thanksgiving, we don't meet on campus the week after Thanksgiving. That's kind of a week to get everything finished. And we have one final class. So because Thanksgiving is so freakishly late this year, really once Thanksgiving hits, we've got one final class meeting after that. So I just want to make sure that these are moving along and that content is getting in there, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So, yeah, we started class 57 minutes ago, so that's just about halfway. So, like I said, no expectations. I am here. If you would like me to work on something, if you just want to work on your own, I'm fine with that. If you want to just go home and get an extra hour of sleep, I'm fine with that. But I'm just, like I said, I'm trying to be as helpful as I can in terms of keeping everybody up on what we've done and what should have been submitted thus far. So use the time as you wish. If you want to throw on headphones and listen to music, I'm totally okay with that.